Hi everyone, welcome to Retrospective, and thanks for watching this. Make sure you like it, leave a comment, subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss any videos. Make sure you share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram, share it on TikTok, share it on Twitter. Like, comment, subscribe, feed the algorithm.
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 1987.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It is not as sexy or as exciting as the Iranian arms deal.
What a hell of a year. And not just because I was born. It was a great year for entertainment media. Just look at this roster of movies that all have had significant cultural impact.
Come quietly or...
The hell are you?
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
Beach walking, huh?
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you. You seem a decent fellow. I hate to die.
Plus, several shows with long-lasting appeal would make their debut this fall as well. Full freaking House, baby. That show was still a juggernaut with kids born several years after the show ended. And that's just established mediums. 1987 is a year that would truly define what home console games would become. Imagine, all in the same year, new IPs of fantastic quality, and all within 7 months. What a wild year! If Super Mario Bros. Was the tease of what was to come back in 1985, 1987 was the promise fulfilled. These games established genres. They took what Super Mario Bros. Had begun and kicked it up a notch.
Damn! Oh, yeah!
What's absolutely insane about this is that we got Metroid and The Legend of Zelda not only in the same year, but the same month. When your industry is new and you don't exactly know what will and won't be a hit, it's hard to plan release dates accordingly, but here we are. Both of these games would do well. Zelda would fare better, while Metroid didn't do as well in Japan, but would sell pretty well in North America. Both will have many imitators, and both would go on to become long-standing franchises. Well, one to be more favored at least.
Who needs courage when you have a gun?
No, world. You put your hands up.
The Legend of Zelda and Metroid are like peas and carrots. They go well together, but they're also part of two completely different food groups. Fun fact, peas are not vegetables, they are legumes. We call them vegetables, but they actually belong to the bean family, or if you're fancy, legumes. Weren't expecting to learn about beans today, were ya? The Legend of Zelda and Metroid are as similar as they are different. While Metroid is more centered on action than Zelda was, for both games, that's not their main focus. The main challenge isn't actually found in completing each level. I mean, Zelda would still incorporate a level structure. Metroid would almost abandon the idea completely. The main idea in both games is exploration. It wasn't about getting to the goal, but about finding the goal. Yet with a similar skeleton, we would get two very different games. The year is 1984. Shigeru Miyamoto is diving headfirst into new territory, designing a game for a home console versus an arcade cabinet. So far, his work has been profitable and notable for Nintendo. He helped make Nintendo competitive in the arcade circuit with Donkey Kong. He furthered the character of Mario with the Mario Bros. Game, officially giving Jumpman a name. He worked as a designer and sometimes director on the arcade titles Tennis, Baseball, Punch-Out, Golf, and the Famicom titles Excitebike and Devil World. Most of these games you did end up seeing on the NES or Famicom, with the exception of Devil World and Excitebike, which were Famicom exclusive, and he worked on those titles in tandem. Devil World was developed in Kyoto while Excitebike's team was in Tokyo. Miyamoto would travel back and forth to check on Excitebike's progress. Devil World, on the other hand, was a Pac-Man clone slash, I'll just say it, ripoff. It was never released in America because Nintendo of America had a ban on religious icons in their games, and this game was chock full of them. Also, I'm having a hard time just processing what in the hell is going on in this game. Our main character is a dragon that attacks the ghost of Satan with the power of a crucifix and also eating ice cream cones? I don't... Okay. So in 1984, Miyamoto started work on The Legend of Zelda. Part of his inspiration were the Indiana Jones movies that were incredibly popular at the time, and also his own childhood memories of exploring woods and caves around his home. He wanted to recreate that awe and wonder of discovery he experienced as a child in a digital form. Like Excitebike and Devil World, The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. Were developed simultaneously. But this time, they were developed by the same team. Ideas would be shared across development and would be moved between the two games. For example, the fireball pillars were originally supposed to be a Zelda mechanic, but then were moved over to Super Mario Bros. Because the team decided the idea fit better for Mario. This wouldn't be the last time Miyamoto would share and split ideas between Mario and Zelda. Something similar would happen during the development of Mario's and Zelda's first 3D games for the Nintendo 64. During this time of simultaneous development, Miyamoto did put forth a philosophy to differentiate the two games from each other. It was quite simple. He called Zelda the anti-Mario. This helped decide which ideas belong to which game. The Legend of Zelda originally started out with only 5 dungeons. The idea was players would choose a dungeon to enter from on the title screen and then fight their way through it. As development progressed, Miyamoto thought it would be more fun to explore an overworld to find the dungeons. Thus, the land of Hyrule was born. Fun fact, the overworld was designed in one sitting on a large sheet of graph paper. Miyamoto drew the right side while Tezuka drew the left. It was drawn using markers, that is, ink. They did have whiteout to fix mistakes, but there isn't much whiteout used. They light out the whole world based mainly on intuition in one multi-hour sitting. With the world and level design coming into place, the focus of The Legend of Zelda became clear. This is a game that would take a long time to complete. It wasn't going to be about attaining a high score or getting to the end of a level to get to the next. The point was to go on a journey to find the 8 pieces of the Triforce and rescue Princess Zelda from the evil pig monster, Ganon. It was an experience to be savored and shared. Miyamoto liked what he saw coming out of the PC RPG scene. In those games, players would share with each other where they were in the game, what they found, and how they got their character more powerful. But the mechanics were more complicated than what was on the Nintendo, and that was a barrier to entry for mainstream audiences. Miyamoto wanted to create that sharing of individual experiences without the complexity of a niche genre. So he simplified everything in Zelda. There were no experience points and no number showing hit points. Instead, your health was represented with hearts, and you gained extra hearts by completing dungeons and finding hidden caves to increase your heart count. You got more powerful swords and better armor as you explored the overworld and found them. The game had a singular focus: bomb every wall, burn every bush. Explore every nook and cranny to find all that you could find. Later dungeons would also be hidden behind these burnable bushes and bombable walls, making this exploration factor not just a side quest, but absolutely necessary to complete the game. The secrets were a bit obtuse though. There weren't clues as to which walls were bombable or which bushes may hold a secret. You had to bomb each wall, burn each bush, and the hints you would find from old men hidden in caves were hardly ever helpful. Partly thanks to a translation issue, and partly thanks to Miyamoto's own stab at copywriting. In an interview about Zelda's development, Miyamoto actually talks about how he wrote some of the text boxes for the game, because he did fancy himself a copywriter. And so he literally wrote, "It's a secret to everybody for the moblin who gives you rupees in secret caves." He thought his meaning was clear, but us American audiences kind of scratched our head at that. Throughout the course of the game, not only would you find hearts and armor and swords, you'd also find other gadgets and tools to use on your adventure. but even then, it still wasn't entirely clear in how you could use some of them. For example, you may have gotten the bow from the first dungeon, but you needed to purchase the arrow separately. But if you didn't do that and you reached the dungeon with Goma, you couldn't defeat her because she could only be killed with bows and arrows to the eye. You also may have had trouble with King Dodongo because there was nothing to tell you that he would eat bombs that would explode inside him. The game was completely obtuse in ways that can be frustrating. But at the same time, that was kind of the point. Miyamoto wanted players to share with friends what they found and figured out. The game was meant to be completed with help from other players in the community. As much as this game was about exploring and capturing the wonder of finding something new, it was also about the community that played it. Kids on the playground would share where they found the magic sword or an extra heart container, where you could find the silver arrow that defeated Ganon. You were meant to figure out the game through trial and error and then tell your buddy what you discovered. In turn, he would share with you what he discovered, and by communicating with each other, you both would help each other beat the game. Kind of like what Miyamoto saw with the RPG games and what their player base would do. Super Mario Bros. Released in 1985 in both Japan and America. That was a swan song to cartridge games. It would show what the Famicom and Nintendo were capable of. In 1986, the Famicom Disk System launched with The Legend of Zelda as a launch title. The disk system expanded the size of the game and also made save states a possibility. Super Mario was a swan song to cartridges. The Legend of Zelda was the overture to a new breed of home console video games. Unfortunately, the disk system wouldn't sell well, and thus would never come out to any other market. Fortunately though, cartridge tech would catch up, and The Legend of Zelda would be ported to the Nintendo Entertainment System and released in the United States in 1987. Though they did have to drop a sound channel and add a battery to the cartridge to make the saving feature work. The Legend of Zelda released in the United States, and Nintendo of America made a large event about it. They even made the game cartridge gold. It was a hit, and it helped usher in a new era of home console video games. While Miyamoto and his team were hard at work over at Nintendo R&D 4, now known as Nintendo EAD, the R&D 1 division had a small project of their own in the works. Headed by Gunpei Yokoi, R&D 1 was the largest and oldest development division at Nintendo. Yokoi started as an electrical engineer at Nintendo in 1965 to help run their manufacturing facility. This is when Nintendo primarily made and sold playing cards along with other toys here and there. Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi was touring the facility one day when he saw a little device that Yokoi had made in his spare time. He was impressed with it and asked him to make it into a full-fledged product, which he did. And it was very profitable for Nintendo. Yokoi was quickly promoted and given his own division to run. And as the Nintendo entered the video game space in the 70s and 80s, Yokoi became instrumental in establishing Nintendo in this space. In 1985, the Famicom was a runaway success, as well as the NES in America, thanks in large part to Super Mario Bros. Developed by Miyamoto's team. While Miyamoto diverted his team's attention to finishing The Legend of Zelda, Yokoi tasked two of his team members to begin development on a game similar in scope and feel to Super Mario. The two team members were graphic designers with no game designer or programming experience whatsoever. They had worked on some of the Game & Watch titles, but they hadn't done much outside of that. As a matter of fact, they'd only been with the company for a little over a year. Yokoi's philosophy, though, was if you can draw, you can make a game. I mean, who can fault him for that? We really didn't know much about design this early on in the industry, and everybody was still figuring this out in a fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants fashion. Well, we do know one of the designers was Hiroji Kayotake. In the developer interviews, I found the other designer was not named. Doing a little sleuthing, I do know that both Kayotake and his partner were relatively new hires and had only been at the company, about a year or so. My best guess is the second developer was more than likely Hirofumi Matsuoka, but that is just an educated guess. These two goofballs were largely left on their own to develop whatever game their imaginations came up with. They decided they wanted to create a space version of what they also called an anti-Mario game. Hey, there's that anti-Mario game phrase again, which their definition of an anti-Mario game was pretty much changing the character's physics around. They took the inertia out of the character's jump and they also didn't want you to avoid enemies by jumping, but turn the jump itself into a weapon. The idea for the screw attack was actually one of the first ideas they had in development. And to make it even more anti-Mario, they took a lot of inspiration from Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien movie, and spent a lot of their development time getting the tone and atmosphere right, as well as the core mechanics and moves established of the playable character Samus Aran. So not only would the jump physics be different from Mario, jump attack be different from Mario, the tone itself would be completely opposite of Mario. Instead of light and bright colors and friendly, it was going to be dark, brooding, and lonely. Originally called Space Hunter, the name was changed to Metroid, which was a smashing of the words Metro and Android together. Metro because the game took place in a series of underground caverns, kind of like a metro, and Android because Samus looked kind of like an android. Metroid ended up becoming the name of the elusive deadly creatures that were the crux of the story for the game. So after 10 months of work, these two had very little to show for themselves, and the game was set to be released in just 3 more months. Enter Yoshio Sakamoto. This is where things get complicated. From my perspective and opinion, credit is a finicky thing. To some people, it is incredibly important. For others, not so much. The thing with being credited with something is that it can really bolster your career or ruin it. You know, whatever. I find myself at an in-between view on credit. It's nice, but not of the utmost importance. But I do want to acknowledge exactly who did what and who is owed their proper dues. Yoshio Sakamoto seems to be given the credit as the creator of the Metroid franchise, which I find to be, odd. Considering that this Nintendo developer interview claims that it was originally Hiroji Kayotake and that other unnamed developer, potentially Hirofumi Matsuoka, who worked on their own for some time. Sakamoto confirms this himself in the interview. He actually didn't step in until these last 3 months, and when he was approached to join the team and help these two hapless chaps, Kayotake and maybe Matsuoka, finish their game, he initially refused. Knowing their workload he would be under, he said no. But because he happened to be between projects and a more senior designer convinced him to join the team, he finally agreed. Sakamoto joined the Metroid team and took over as the director. And once seeing that after 10 months of work hardly anything was done, he helped mobilize the entire department of R&D 1 to finish the game. This is where it gets interesting. While Sakamoto wasn't a part of the team for the bulk of the time, he is technically responsible for the bulk of the work. And because he was able to wrangle a game out of this, he was given the title of game director. So while he may not be the creator of Metroid, Sakamoto is the savior of Metroid. But at the same time, I'd like to make sure in this video that Kayotake's and Matsuoka's, maybe, names are not erased from the history of this franchise's inception. Without them, the base of the core mechanics that we know and identify as a Metroid game probably wouldn't exist. Like we credit both Miyamoto and Tezuka as the original creators of Mario, we should likewise have the creation of Metroid shared among Sakamoto, Kayotake, and Matsuoka. Maybe. After Sakamoto took over, they began by cutting a lot of the moves that Kayotake had given Samus. They weren't going to be able to fit all he had designed into the system's memory. While this crushed Kayotake, he was very relieved to finally have help in finishing a game he had no idea how to finish. With the very limited time restraint, the team worked well into the night for 3 months straight. While they couldn't create new assets to help fill out what hadn't been designed because of time, they did figure out ways around it and create differentiation between the different areas and levels of the game to make something unique and imaginative. Once finished, Sakamoto felt a real sense of accomplishment at achieving the impossible. He says of the experience, "Gradually, Metroid grew into a game, and when it was nearly complete, the ending crawl came together with the names of members of the development staff. When I saw that, I almost cried. It was an emotional moment." Now, I just want to take a second here to reflect on this. Metroid has absolutely zero, and I mean zero, business being as good as it is. This game should barely be good, let alone an original masterpiece, let alone the genesis of an entire subgenre of games that so many indie developers are now copying out the wazoo. The completion of this game is nothing short of miraculous. But why was this game so successful? One was its atmosphere. While Miyamoto was creating gleeful, fun-filled adventures full of delight and happiness, Metroid struck a more serious tone. It was empty and foreboding. The soundtrack evoked a darker tone and showed that Nintendo isn't just for kids. Not to say the game was horribly violent or gory, it wasn't, but it doesn't have the playful nature other Nintendo software titles had. 2, it was fun to explore. While by today's standards the map really isn't that big, but with no point of reference or map screen, you had to learn the labyrinth yourself. And most games, like Tower of Druaga, had most of the labyrinth laid out on the screen right before you. This one was room by room, section by section. Exploring an area you weren't equipped for yet would mean almost certain death. 3, they changed how the power-ups work compared to Mario and other titles. When you get the Morph Ball or Mari Ball, you get to keep it for the rest of the game. When you get a new missile tank, it doesn't refill your missiles, it adds to your capacity. Same with energy tanks. The Various Suit cuts down your damage and it doesn't go away. Mario would lose his Fire Flower power-up when he took damage, and the Starman was limited by a timer. Everything that Samus got, she kept. They would also help you reach new areas of the game that weren't reachable before, so each new power-up opened up more of the game. The game is quite imaginative. It was non-linear and open, unlike other platformers that had come before it. Metroid was in a league of its own. So why talk about these games together in one video and not separately? Well, because it's kind of hard to separate these first entries of these franchises. As different as they are, and as different as they will become as they age and get iterated on in future installments, they share more similarities than differences, to be honest. They also both accomplished something that would change the course of game design. They simplified the RPG. They made it approachable to a wider audience. Miyamoto did it consciously with Zelda, while Sakamoto and Kayotake did it unintentionally, or so I assume. Your typical RPG character gets stronger the more they level up. They level up by fighting and defeating enemies and gaining experience points. With each level, their health goes up, magic goes up, offense goes up, defense stats, and so on. Both Zelda and Metroid took those ideas and stripped them down to their base forms. You gained experience by playing and exploring more. The more you knew about the game, the enemies, and how they worked, the better you were at fighting them. You gained more hearts in Zelda by defeating bosses, and you gained more energy tanks in Metroid by finding them. Sometimes in the open, sometimes hidden away. You gained better defensive stats by finding an armor upgrade, the rings in Zelda and the Various Suit in Metroid. Zelda upped the attack stat with finding more powerful swords, which you could only get if you had a certain amount of heart containers. Metroid gave you the long beam and then the ice beam and missile tanks to up your ammo capacity. Zelda was a more obvious, straightforward RPG-lite, while Metroid took the ideas and applied them to a typical action platformer. As much as their tones were different and their core gameplay was different, they actually share a lot of common bonds when you look beyond the surface. They simplified the RPG genre and applied its concepts in ways that make sense to their own respective genres. They also featured exploration as the main mechanic, where it was about the journey and not as much about reaching the goal. With new items, you unlocked more of the world, and more could then be explored. Also, the strategy guide exists because of these games. Nintendo Power exists partly to give players walkthroughs. The very first issue of Nintendo Power has a complete guide for Zelda's Second Quest. 3 years later, in the October 1991 issue of Nintendo Power, a complete walkthrough for Metroid is published. Both games were released in the same year, 1986 in Japan, and in the same year and month, August 1987, in America. Each game has its own unique tone and intended audience. If you wanted a rollicking fantasy adventure to live your boyhood dreams of saving the kingdom as a shining knight, you had Zelda. If you wanted a brooding, mature sci-fi experience like the Alien movies, you had Metroid. Both games accomplished the same wonder of exploration, just with different genres. They are as similar as they are different. Metroid and Zelda are two sides of the same coin. Hey, thanks for watching this. I really appreciate it. Like I showed at the beginning, if you could please like, subscribe, comment, do all that stuff that feeds the algorithm. It will really help me out. And leave a comment. Let me know what you're liking, what you're not liking. Any games or series you'd like me to do in the future, because this will be way in the future. This Metroid Zelda one's going to take a while. Not all of them are going to be combined like this. I just thought I'd combine the first two because it just seemed, it just seemed to kind of make sense. Okay, bye.